Oleksandr Usyk versus a prime David Haye. Who wins? Now, before I answer this question, I've got to give a shout out to my boy Kieran, because he was the one who actually asked this question on Facebook. Got to give a shout out to him. He's a self-confessed David Haye fanboy. Appreciate the honesty. And he's obviously picking David Haye in this fantasy matchup. But I'm not a fanboy of Usyk or Haye. I've got no horse in this race. So I want to give my neutral, objective opinion and assessment of it. Now, at the end of the day, there is no right answer. And there is no wrong answer, because it's all conjecture. Unless we've got a time machine where we can take Oleksandr Usyk back a few years and put him in the ring with a prime David Haye and find out what the result would have been, then none of us will ever know. Yeah, so let's not get into name calling and all that kind of stuff in the comment section over something that none of us can ever prove. Yeah, it's all just a bit of fun fantasy matchup. Now, if you were to compare these two fighters in terms of achievement, we can stop the video right here because it's a no contest. Oleksandr Usyk is a far more accomplished cruiserweight than David Haye ever was. Even though he's only had 16 fights, look at what he's packed in to those 16 fights. He's got a tremendous resume for a 16-0 fighter. From Glavatsky, Machunu, Hunter, Hook, Bradis, Gassiev, Belly. I mean, this guy has been killing it. Tremendous resume. David Haye can't compete with that resume. And I said in a video a few weeks ago, in fact, it might have even been a couple months ago now. I lose track. But I said in that video, whenever it was, that Oleksandr Usyk is right up there with Evander Holyfield in terms of his achievement level as a cruiserweight champion. Holyfield and Usyk really stand head and shoulders above all other cruiserweights in history in terms of achievement. But that doesn't necessarily mean that Holyfield and Usyk would have beaten every other cruiserweight in history. Because that's something a bit different. Boxing is not linear. It's chess, it ain't checkers. It's rock, paper, scissors. Just because fighter A beats fighter B and fighter B beats fighter C, it don't mean that fighter C can't beat fighter A. History has shown us this. Styles make fights. And so, how would Oleksandr Usyk's style match up against a prime David Haye style? Now, looking at Usyk's career so far, the three opponents who, in my opinion, gave him the most trouble were Michael Hunter, Maris Bridis, and Tony Bellew. And out of those three, I would say Bridis gave him the most trouble of all. And what did all three opponents have in common? The three guys who gave him the most trouble. They were all primarily boxing on the back foot, counterpunching. Yeah, back foot counterpunching. And what was Mr. David Haye so very good at in his prime? That's right, back foot counterpunching. Unlike Tony Bellew, David Haye can match Oleksandr Usyk for reach. See, David Haye's got the 78-inch reach. Usyk has got the 78-inch reach. Bellew's reach is only 74. Unlike Maris Bridis too, a 75-inch reach. Not as long as David Haye's, he's only 6'1". Now, Michael Hunter has got a pretty good reach. Before I've even clicked on him, I can tell you he's got a good reach. All right, 79, so it's an inch and a half longer than David Haye's. But Michael Hunter doesn't have the kind of punching power that David Haye had. Michael Hunter doesn't have the kind of explosiveness and one-shot speed that David Haye had. The kind of athleticism that David Haye had. Michael Hunter don't have that. Not like he's not an athletic fighter, he is, especially at cruiserweight, but not on the level of a David Haye. So we've seen that Usyk has some problems with that type of style. We've seen that these guys were able to tag him with pretty clean shots. Bellew was able to tag him. Breedis was able to tag him. Hunter was able to tag him with clean shots while boxing on the back foot and countering him. What happens if David Haye starts tagging Usyk with clean shots? A prime David Haye. What happens? I don't think Oleksandr Usyk would be able to box the same kind of fight against a prime David Haye that we saw him box against Tony Bellew, that we saw him box against Maris Breedis or Michael Hunter. I don't think he could box that kind of fight. I think if he boxed that kind of fight against a prime David Haye, there would be a very good chance that he would get himself knocked the F out. Seriously. He would have to come up with a different type of game plan. I think that Oleksandr Usyk would have to move a bit more against David Haye. I don't think he could play that cat and mouse game, as some people describe. I think it was it Paulie Malignaggi or Carl Froch, one of them, described the Usyk Bellew fight as a cat and mouse game. I don't think Usyk could fight that cat and mouse fight with a prime David Haye. Haye's arms were much longer than Bellew's. I'm talking about the prime Haye here, not the version of Haye who got knocked out by Bellew twice. The prime Haye. The one who knocked out Macronelli. The one who knocked out Mormek. That guy. Very light on his feet. Very fast with his punches. Very powerful. Long arms. Same guy who knocked out what's his name now? Monty Barrett. All right, that's when he stepped up to heavyweight. So I think Usyk would have to fight a much more cautious fight against a prime Haye, where he's using his jab a lot. And look, he was cautious in the early rounds against Tony Bellew because he felt the weight of some of Bellew's shots. And if he thinks those were powerful, that's nothing compared to a prime David Haye. So, yeah, I think he would have to fight a way more cautious fight. And David Haye would probably oblige him in terms of fighting a cautious fight. If it was known that Usyk was a formidable fighter, especially if Usyk was just some random guy who popped up out of nowhere, who nobody knew anything about, then I'm sure David Haye would take a lot of chances against Usyk. And that might play into Usyk's hands, potentially. But if Usyk was undisputed cruiserweight champion, or let's say had 2 belts and Haye had the other 2, and they were clashing, I think Haye would oblige Usyk in terms of fighting a chess match, and it could turn out to be a boring affair. You know, down the stretch, David Haye, let me not say down the stretch, but David Haye was known to have stamina issues throughout his whole career, even as a cruiserweight. He was low volume, but he got away with being low volume because he would keep his opponents in check with the fear that they had of his punching power. Would Oleksandr Usyk also succumb to that fear? Or would he try and press the issue? You know, these are the questions that you have to ask yourselves. I'm going to say that prime Haye versus Usyk would be a very, very cagey affair. And I actually think it will go the distance, and it might even go down to a split decision. That's what I envision. I could also see a scenario where Usyk maybe does get clipped, wobbled or dropped at some stage, but I don't feel like David Haye would finish him. That's just my intuition on it. I don't think Haye would finish him. Haye, and some people might disagree with this now, I don't think Haye was ever the greatest finisher, to be honest with you. I'm not saying he was a bad finisher, but I don't think he was ever the greatest finisher. Because David Haye, when he was finishing a guy, would often waste a lot of punches, would often be flailing around with shots, you know? And I know it worked against certain opponents like Audley Harrison and what have you, but a lot of other guys, it really didn't work. I mean, an example of it might be his fight against John Ruiz, where he dropped Ruiz heavily in the opening seconds of the fight, but then 8 or 9 rounds later, Ruiz was still there. And this was a 38-year-old, totally washed up version of John Ruiz, you know? So, yeah, I'm not sure David Haye would get Usyk out of there. I think Usyk is savvy enough and experienced enough to whereby if he did get hurt, he'd be able to ride out the storm and see it through, you know, even if he got dropped. But if he did get hurt by a prime David Haye or dropped, I think that would make the fight from that point on easier for Haye, because I would imagine Usyk would be a little more hesitant after being dropped or, you know, seriously hurt. So I think it's a very close fight between the two of them. And, it might even come down to where the fight takes place. If it took place in the UK, I'll probably lean towards David Haye winning the fight on points. Yeah, on points. I know people are going to say Usyk is way more skillful, and I agree, he is more skillful. But styles make fights. And from what I've seen, Usyk is susceptible to back foot counterpunches, and he's never fought a back foot counterpuncher with the kind of the combination of athleticism, speed, and devastating punching power that prime David Haye had. So in the UK, I'd lean towards Haye by a tight decision, maybe split decision. Elsewhere, I might lean towards Usyk. You know, if it was in the Ukraine, definitely Usyk. But that's how I see it. Again, none of us will ever know. It's all a hypothetical. But based on the styles, that's how I see it going. I think it would be a relatively cagey affair. And I think David Haye would be successful. Even if he lost a close decision, I think David Haye would be successful in bringing Usyk's punch output down. I think he would be, because he was so much of a sharpshooter. And again, if Usyk's punch volume was low in the early rounds against Bellew, and it was, and I'm talking about, you know, him throwing proper shots. He was throwing little speculative probing jabs here and there, but in terms of throwing real, you know, heavy leather, it was a low punch output. And a lot of the shots he was throwing early in the fight weren't even landing. He was just flicking shots out there, weren't really landing. But against David Haye, you even need to be careful what shots you're flicking out that are not landing, because your arm is still, your glove is still away from your face. David Haye will step in and land that straight right hand. You got to be careful. So I think Haye would be successful at lowering Usyk's punch output. I really do. Anyway, excuse me. Take a sip of this water. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Oleksandr Usyk versus a prime David Haye. Who would win in this style matchup? Drop it all below, people. It's happening, I'm out. Join me on Patreon. I upload a minimum of 2 podcasts every single week, covering a wide variety of controversial topics, as well as live stream Q&A sessions. Take a look on screen right now at some of the podcasts I've produced so far. For just $3 a month, the equivalent of about £2 a month, you get access to all my new podcasts and my entire back catalogue of past podcasts, including my popular Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer series. You can listen on your computer or on your smartphone or tablet by downloading the Patreon app from the Google Play Store or the App Store for free. The Patreon app also allows you to download each podcast in MP3. For less than the price of a cup of coffee, you get access to dozens of hours of exclusive content. It's easy to sign up, there's no contract, and you can cancel at any time. So come and join our community of free and critical thinkers by signing up with me here on Patreon today.